Lebanon's president has rejected an international investigation into the blast in the port of Beirut, saying it would delay justice. Healthcare workers in El Salvador have voiced concerns that the country's health system is on the brink of collapse. More than 3,000 families have been affected by floods in Sudan, which have killed at least 10 people. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Lebanon, where President Michel Aoun rejected an international investigation into the blast in the port of Beirut this Friday, saying it would delay justice. The president said there were two possibilities behind this week's devastating explosion, either negligence or an external attack by a missile or bomb. Aoun said he had asked France to provide aerial images in order to see if there were any planes or missiles in the air at the time of the blast, which destroyed the city's port area and killed more than 150 people while injuring over 5,000. Authorities have said they believe the explosion happened when fire touched over 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, which had been stored at the port since 2013. The cause of the initial fire is not known. Aoun told journalists that he was informed of the ammonium nitrate last month and had immediately ordered something to be done about it, adding that previous Lebanese governments had also received warnings about the explosive material.
We have asked for, I personally asked from the French president, if they have aerial pictures, that they give them to us, so we can determine whether there were planes or if we can see pictures of missiles. And as we asked him, we'll ask other countries if they have pictures, so we can determine if this was an external attack or not, or if it was the other possibility, if it was negligence at the storage facility.
World Health Organization officials announced the delivery of personal protective equipment to Lebanon this Friday. The move came after 17 containers filled with supplies and equipment for the COVID-19 response were destroyed in Tuesday's blast in the port of Beirut. The WHO Emergencies Director for the Eastern Mediterranean region noted that new supplies, including aprons, gloves, masks and ventilators, are expected to arrive over the next week. He also noted concerns about maintaining a focus on fighting the novel coronavirus in the aftermath of the blasts.
We had 17 containers full of supplies and equipment for the COVID outbreak response, mainly personal protective equipment, the PPE that you hear about. So we have to urgently replace that. We've got $1.7 million worth of PPE supplies that we're putting together in our regional warehouse right now, and we expect to have that on a plane hopefully within 48 hours. This massive extra burden of injured people, displaced people, means that resources are going to have to be focused on that response. And we worry that an already overburdened health system and Ministry of Health is going to be overstretched to meet the needs of both the COVID response and the emergency response.
Belgian Foreign Minister Philippe Goffin noted his country's delivery of emergency aid to Lebanon on Friday following the blast in Beirut earlier this week.
This C-130 contains 10,000 emergency relief kits, which include medicines for the equivalent of 10,000 people for 3 months, sleeping bags, 4 water jerry cans, and so we are loading a total of 10 tons of material, which is 63 cubic meters of material, which is close to the maximum capacity of our C-130. Well, we are in a long-term process here, unfortunately, and so this coordination is essential. This aid will inevitably be long-term because what is being asked for today will still be asked for tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and in the coming months.
The president of Algeria announced this Friday that a humanitarian aid shipment would be sent to Lebanon. The shipment includes construction materials to assist in the reconstruction of Beirut. 4 aircraft were sent, one transporting medical, surgical and civil defense personnel to support the recovery efforts. A second plane was loaded with medical and pharmaceutical supplies. A third carried food, and a fourth tents and blankets for those whose homes were destroyed. Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune confirmed the aid shipment after a telephone conversation with his Lebanese counterpart on Wednesday. The Israeli army bombed different locations north of the Gaza Strip early this Friday. Israeli media claimed that the attack was targeted at facilities of the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas. The strikes were the second on the besieged Gaza Strip this week. On Monday, Israeli forces targeted different Hamas military posts in the central and southern parts of the Strip. The Israeli regime continues to attempt to justify its attacks, claiming they are in retaliation for strikes carried out against Israeli settlements by resistance groups in the south of the occupied Palestinian territories. And we'll be right back after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Healthcare workers in El Salvador voiced concerns on Friday of an imminent collapse of the country's health system due to the high number of COVID-19 patients. Salvadoran health authorities reported 418 new COVID-19 cases on Thursday, bringing a total to over 19,000. 372 of the new cases were locally transmitted, while 46 were imported. Health authorities also reported that the highest number of COVID-19 fatalities since the outbreak of the pandemic was confirmed during the week of July 19th to 25th. The death toll now stands at over 500.
We cannot talk about the fact that we already found the cure and that it stabilizes. Nevertheless, we can say that during this period of time, the variable has been changing constantly, the same as the number of confirmed cases per day. There is a concern at the hospitals that this will exceed human capacity, lower the capacity of supplies, the capacity of beds in hospitals, and in some way, many resources that are being consumed, quite specifically oxygen. The political class will continue to face each other. The pandemic will only be one more scenario for that confrontation, even with the human drama that this represents. But it is a situation that unfortunately we also observe in other countries. It is not an exclusive behavior of the Salvadorian political class.
Mexican health authorities reported a surge in COVID-19 cases and deaths this Friday. Mexico has confirmed more than 460,000 coronavirus cases and over 50,000 fatalities. Undersecretary of Health Hugo López-Gatell noted that over 6,500 new cases were reported in the last 24 hours, as well as 819 deaths. Authorities in Belize announced the reimposition of COVID-19 restrictions on Thursday following a surge in new COVID-19 cases. Health authorities confirmed 28 new cases, of which 20 were locally transmitted on the island of San Pedro. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Dean Barrow announced emergency measures, including a nationwide curfew and the closure of bars, discos and other nightlife facilities. He also called for strict use of face masks and a limit on social gatherings. Meanwhile, San Pedro Island has been put under total lockdown. This Friday saw protests across Brazil demanding the impeachment of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Our correspondent Brian Meir has the details.
Today in Brazil, a coalition of popular fronts made up of labor unions and social movements held scores of protests in multiple locations in dozens of cities across the country under the theme of Out with Bolsonaro. The protesters are demanding the impeachment of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro due to his handling of the economy and also to the fact that Brazil is now the #2 worst country in the world for the COVID-19 pandemic as the death toll nears 100,000. So in front of hospitals, in front of businesses, in front of churches across the country, small groups of socially distanced protesters held up crosses to honor the nearly 100,000 dead and signs saying things like 100,000 deaths, 100,000 reasons, implying that there are 100,000 reasons to impeach President Jair Bolsonaro. Now, as the issue of COVID has become politicized by the far right, and it has been left to the left to embrace the basic tenets of science and urge people to stay indoors, socially distance, quarantine as much as possible, this was the first coordinated national protest since the pandemic began. And as representatives from the CUT Labor Union Federation were saying in Sao Paulo, this is only the beginning. There's an election coming up in a few months, and it's up to the left now to try to work hard to undo all of the damage that's happened since the 2016 coup and since the illegal election of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro.
Thank you, Brian. And we move to Bolivia now, where the indefinite general strike organised by the Bolivian Workers' Centre and the Pact of Unity Alliance continues, despite the threats of intervention made by the de facto government. Since last week, social and union organisations have been protesting in different regions of the country to continue exerting pressure on the Supreme Electoral Tribunal after it postponed the general elections until October. Protesters are demanding that the vote be held on September 6, as previously agreed. The Bolivian Workers' Centre, the chief trade union federation of the country, has called to continue the peaceful demonstrations, stressing that the de facto regime is leading the country into an economic, health and social crisis. Meanwhile, spokespersons for different social organisations have denounced the deployment of troops in some areas in an attempt to break up the protests. The relaunching of an agriculture project between Venezuela and Cuba represents a challenge to the US blockade and defence of the two nations' sovereignty, according to the Venezuelan urban agriculture minister. After the signing of the joint project to help urban communities become food self-sufficient, Minister Gabriela Peña stressed the challenges to resume the initiative in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and Washington's escalation of attacks on both countries. The minister also recalled that now, more than ever, the pioneering ideas of commanders Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez on the need to boost agricultural production to ensure local food supplies must be put into practice. Meanwhile, Ibrahim Infante, director of the Foundation for Training and Innovation to support the Agrarian Revolution, noted that this project aims to develop a new culture of food production as local communities produce for themselves. Several Republican governors in the United States have supported the reopening of schools despite the ongoing coronavirus crisis. Authorities in several states are calling for a return to presential lessons, claiming that the move would prevent students from dropping out of school. Meanwhile, health professionals have stressed the importance of maintaining social distancing measures, pointing out that COVID-19 health emergency remains a reality in the United States, where over 5 million cases have been reported and more than 160,000 deaths. And the United States added 1.8 million jobs in July, representing a fall compared to the gains of May and June, and evidence that the coronavirus is still slowing economic recovery. The unemployment rate dropped from 11.1% in June to 10.2% in July, but the figure still exceeds the highest rate during the 2008 to 2009 Great Recession.
But so far this year, we're still running a deficit of more than 12 million jobs. That's the number we need to create or restore to get back to where we were before. We still have 16 million Americans who are unemployed, and that doesn't even capture the number who are working part-time, would like to have full-time work, or are expecting to get called back and are not even looking for work at this point. We see the number of jobs being restored coming in at a falling rate. I think that we can very much correlate that to the fact that we've not been winning the war against the COVID-19 virus. So the outbreaks that we've seen over the last 5 or 6 weeks have had an economic cost to them.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Rains in Sudan, which have claimed the lives of at least 10 people. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, heavy rains triggered floods and landslides while damaging infrastructure in 14 out of 18 Sudanese states. The downpours in the Sudanese state of Blue Nile led to the collapse of a dam, which could jeopardize water supplies to over 84,000 residents. The rainy season in Sudan starts in June and runs through October. An Air India Express plane crashed in the southern Indian state of Kerala on Friday, killing at least 16 and seriously injuring 46. The plane carrying 191 passengers skidded off the runway in rain and broke in two after landing at Calicut Airport. Air India Express authorities have noted that the plane was one of the repatriation flights operated to bring Indian nationals stranded aboard due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. Meanwhile, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi extended his condolences to the families of the victims on Twitter. Authorities have launched an investigation into the incident. Senegalese authorities announced the reimposition of COVID-19 restrictions this Friday after recording a steady rise in a number of cases across the country.
Unfortunately, since the lifting of the state of emergency, we have noted a certain laxity among the population and a clear lack of respect for barrier measures, chiefly the wearing of masks and social distances. I would like to inform you that the following measures have been taken with immediate effect: a ban on gatherings at beaches, sports grounds, public spaces and theaters, prohibition of all demonstrations on the public highway, especially in the Dakar region, mandatory wearing of the masks in the services of the administration and the private sector, in shops, in transport, scrupulous respect of the orders of the Ministry of Transport concerning the number of authorized spaces in the public transport. Any violation of these provisions exposes the perpetrator to penal sanctions, which may range from a fine to imprisonment, in accordance with the provisions of the Code of Contraventions.
As people in Ivory Coast celebrated the 60th anniversary of independence this Friday, President Alassane Ouattara confirmed his participation in the presidential elections to be held in October. President Ouattara formally made the announcement on Thursday, noting that he had decided to reconsider his position and to run for another term. Meanwhile, opposition figures have criticised the move, saying it is a violation of the constitution. President Ouattara is expected to stand against Pascal Afif N'Guessan of the Ivorian Popular Front and former President Henri Konan Bédier of the Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire African Democratic Rally.
We find this decision unacceptable because we believe that President Ouattara is trying to cling to power. We have decided to take vigorous action on the ground. We are going to use all peaceful and democratic means, marches, sit-ins, in any case, all possible means to oppose this third mandate.
We invite the President of the Republic to ensure that he can safeguard social peace and stability. To do otherwise will be to open up a Pandora's box that will give rise to uncontrollable excess.
An armed attack caused the death of at least 20 people in the northern Nigerian state of Kaduna on Thursday. The attack occurred on Thursday morning when armed men invaded villages and opened fire against residents' homes. Several survivors fled to nearby villages, while dozens of homes were damaged. Meanwhile, local authorities in the government area of Sangon Kataf have accused Fulani militia of being responsible for the violent attack. Irish authorities placed 3 counties into lockdown this Friday following an increase in COVID-19 cases.
This evening, in response to the increased spread of the disease in counties Kildare, Laois and Offaly, and acting on the very clear advice of public health officials, the government has decided to introduce a number of limited restrictions within those 3 counties for a period of 2 weeks from midnight tonight. In these 3 counties, everyone should restrict their movements to within their own county, except for the purposes of work and for other essential journeys.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net, and you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines